Hello, it is me again, Becky. Thank you for stopping by. And today I have a massive collab for you. I've really been missing my collab projects that I used to do. I've been doing a lot of just single recommendations for the last couple months, and I'm just like, oh, I really want to do another big collab project. So that is what we are going to be doing today. We are going to be doing the ABCs of Romance recommendation collaboration. So I will have everybody who is participating in this collab, their channels tagged down below, as well as a playlist linked, so you can find all of the videos all in one spot. You can binge them throughout the day, and you can see how all of these great booktubers interpreted this ABCs of Romance challenge. So you might be getting A to Z books that are on their TBRs. You might be getting A to Z recommendations of a specific genre. You might be getting A to Z recommendations of tropes. You might be getting A to Z recommendations of character names. The options were all up to their interpretation, imagination, what have you. So be sure to check that out and watch all of the recommendation videos that they have. So I will be sharing with you the ABCs of Romance book tropes. So I'm going to go through the alphabet and give you a trope that starts with each letter, and then I'm going to share with you a book that has that trope in it. I'm not going to go too far in depth about what these books are about as far as synopsis. I will give you a brief little attention grabber about them, but just know that if it is recommended, it has that trope in it that I am talking about. So let's get started, because there's 26 letters and I don't want this video to be extremely long. For A, I went with age gap, and one of my favorite age gaps that I have reread a couple times. It made like my best books of the decade list that I did in 2020, and that is The Dean's List by Kelly Collins. This is about a woman who enters into this prostitution ring in college to pay her way through college, and she gets matched up with men who are in her respective fields to sort of give her advice in exchange for either companionship, sex, what have you. But one of the smartest female main characters I've ever read. A really short book, but the chemistry is really good in here. For the letter B, I am going to go with a Beauty and the Beast retelling, reimagining, what have you. And for that, I'm going to recommend Into the Heartless Wood by Joanne Ruth Meyer. So this is an upper YA fantasy romance. And in this, the Beast is a girl and the Beauty is a boy. And they meet in the woods, and she is a almost tree spirit. That's how she looks when he first meets her, is she looks like a tree nymph. So this was really, really good, very atmospheric. I loved the chemistry between the characters, and one that I don't see enough people talking about. For the letter C, we're going to go with Curses, and another of my favorite books that I don't talk enough about is Entreat Me by Grace Draven. So this could also fall in the Beauty and the Beast reimagining, because the father and son in this story are cursed, and they need the help of our female main character to break said curse. And the chemistry in here is amazing. These characters are very mature. It has a great sisterly dynamic in it as well. And you really shouldn't miss out on this if you're looking for a book with a curse in it and a Beauty and the Beast reimagining. Highly recommend. For D, we're going to go with Dragons, and this is a series that I talked a lot about last year. I haven't really mentioned it all this much, but that is going to be the Legends of the Storm series by Beck McMaster, the first book being Heart of Fire. Now, this is the shortest book in the series. It's also my least favorite book in the series, just because it doesn't go too far in depth with the characters that the rest of the books do. But this is a historic-inspired fantasy romance about dragon shifters and how they find their mates. And there is some dragon political shenanigans going on with different dragon factions, and it's just a really great series. For E, we are going to go with what I think is probably the most popular trope out there, and that is enemies to lovers. And in all honesty, I didn't have a lot to choose from for this, because I haven't really read too many true enemies to lovers stories. Most of them I read are hate to love, and they are just marketed as enemies to lovers because that's what's popular. But one that I enjoyed, that I really did think fit this enemies to lovers, like true enemies, both of them want to kill each other, is How Does It Feel by Janine O'Reilly. This is about a woman who finds herself falling down a portal when she stumbles into a fairy circle, and she ends up in the unseelie court, right? Or is it the Seelie court? The bad court. I can't remember which one it is. But she is stuck in the bad court where the prince of the unseelie, Fae, tries to kill her in some very deadly ways, all while being attracted to her. So it's a fun time. It's hella dramatic, and it has a very unexpected ending to it. And I really did enjoy this book. This is the only book in this series that I enjoyed. For F, of course, I'm going to give you my favorite trope, which is friends to lovers. And I had many to choose from, but I'm going to share with you a book that I don't talk about enough, and that is Hawthorne and Heathcliff by R.K. Riles. So this is a contemporary romance about two high school students who form a friendship. He ends up working at her uncle's house to fix some things, and she is going through a lot of turmoil with her family. Her uncle is dying, so she feels like she's being abandoned. They form a friendship that translates into their adulthood, and it brings them back together to explore the relationship that they once had. This is such a moving story. It made me freaking cry both times that I've read it. This is another book that made my best books of the decade list when I reread books in 2020. This is just an excellent story that more people need to check out. For the letter G, I'm going to go with Gothic, and for that I'm going to recommend a book that I recently read and enjoyed, and that is Anathema by Carrie Lake. This is a Gothic fantasy romance about a young woman who stumbles into this portal in these dark woods where she is captured and offered sanctuary by this man who was supposed to kill her, and how their relationship develops. This has an incredibly unique magic system set up in it, and it is an incredibly like slow burn Gothic romance with a lot of trauma in it and really cool like creatures. So check it out if you want something Gothic. For the letter H, I'm gonna give you Hear Me Out. And if you don't know what a Hear Me Out romance is, it's a questionable romance. It's a ridiculous scenario, but hear me out. Bagged by the groceries, okay? This is a very short, very smutty novella about a woman who gets bagged by the groceries. It's a fun and hilarious time. There you go. I had a difficult time coming up with a trope that started with I, so this might not necessarily be a trope as it is a character dynamic, but we're going to go with an interracial romance for I. And for that, I'm going to recommend All the King's Men series by Kennedy Ryan, the first book being The Kingmaker. This is a contemporary romance, like second chance, about two people who come from very opposite backgrounds. She is an indigenous woman and he is a white boy whose father runs an oil field, and they meet when she is doing a protest on her native lands, and his father is there to pretty much arrest her, and he ends up saving her. They end up meeting throughout life. These two made me believe that fated mates could be done in a way that is set in a contemporary romance, because it's just that freaking good. If you have not read this series, you need to fix that immediately. For the letter J, I'm going to go with Jealousy, and the first book that I thought of was King of Wrath by Anna Wong. This man is jealous with a capital J, okay? This is about a couple who is forced into an arranged engagement, not so much a marriage, it's more of an engagement. But he is trying to take down her father, and she has no clue about it, and things happen. But this man he doesn't like it when men talk to her. He doesn't like it when men send flowers to her. He doesn't like it when men touch her. He is just jealous beyond belief, and it's so freaking delicious, and I loved it. For the letter K, we're gonna go with Nodding, and if you don't know what nodding is, it is not the video for me to enlighten you about what nodding is. Go Google it, okay? But for that, I'm going to recommend I Married a Naga by Regine Abel. This is an alien romance about two people who are forced into an arranged marriage to save her life. He is a snake man who has a knot, and it's a hella good time, let me tell you. For the letter L, I am going to recommend a later in life romance, which means the characters come into their romance when they are older or later in life. And for that, I'm going to recommend Between Wrath and Mercy by Jess Wisecup. This is a fantasy romance where our main character is a mother, and when her daughter ends up being kidnapped, she has to seek out the help from her once teenage love, who is a prince, to help her find her daughter. And they reconnect and they get a second chance at romance, but it's later in life. For the letter M, I'm going to recommend a monster romance, and for this I'm going to recommend Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. This is a monster fantasy romance. It does take place in a fantasy world. It has some asexual representation in it, and our main character is a shape-shifting monster. She uses things around her, from her victims or just things she finds, to construct her human-like body, and she ends up being saved by this lovely woman named Homily, and their relationship develops. This is so horrific, so heartwarming, so sweet. It just gave me the feels. It was one of my best books of the year last year, and I think if you're looking for a monster romance that is just so sweet, you should check this out. For the letter N, I am going to recommend to you a nerdy romance, which means the characters are nerds, and one I thought of and wanted to recommend was The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love. So both of the main characters in here are bird nerds. They love bird watching, and it was just absolutely delightful. So if you like nerdy characters, you should really check this out. It's so fun. For the letter O, I'm going to recommend another of my favorite tropes, and that is Only One Bed. And there were quite a few books I could have recommended for this, but I wanted to recommend one that I don't talk about enough, or one that isn't talked about enough on Booktube, and that is Krampus and the Crone by Honey Phillips. So this is an alien romance about a alien whose name is Krampusarian and a woman who is a witch, and something happens that leads to them having to be in forced proximity with one another and having to share one bed. And it was just a very sweet, hilarious, heartwarming alien story. For the letter P, I'm going to recommend to you a pirate romance, and for that I'm going to recommend A Ship of Bones and Teeth by Karina Halley. This is a dark Little Mermaid retelling, and the love interest is a pirate with some other fun attributes. This is a slow burn. It's a bit of a thicker one. The smut is really fun in this book as well. And it takes place on the sea with this pirate crew and Marin, who is a very dangerous mermaid. So check it out if you want a pirate romance. For the letter Q, I'm going to recommend a quest romance, and for that I'm going to share with you a book that I recently read this year and absolutely loved, and that is The Scattered Bones by Nicole Scarano. So this story, she has to go on a quest to find her husband's scattered bones in order to put him back together and resurrect him. This is a very short fantasy romance standalone that packs a lot into one short story. But if you want a quest, this is a very fun one. For R, I am going to recommend a royalty romance, and for that I'm going to recommend Queen of the Wild by E.M. Howell. So this is a book I have never heard anybody talk about, but this is for, if you loved ACOTAR, this is a very similar vibes to ACOTAR. We are following an elf queen who needs to reach out to her neighboring kingdom for some help. And there she ends up meeting her romantic interest, who is actually the guard of the prince of that kingdom. And they've known each other throughout their lives. So it is a bit of a like friends to lovers as well. But this, I would say, has very much ACOTAR vibes, slight differences, and I think it goes a little darker in some aspects that we see in ACOTAR. It just goes a little further in those sort of similar scenarios. But I really enjoyed the story. I felt the chemistry between the characters. It also has that trope of like, I love you, but I don't believe I'm good enough for you type thing. And I absolutely loved it. For S, I'm going to recommend to you a second chance romance, and for that I'm going to recommend another Kennedy Ryan book, and that is Before I Let Go. So this is about a couple who gets divorced for very emotional reasons, but they have kids together and they are still working in the same restaurant business, and they're still very much attracted to each other. So they are trying to find their way back to one another, and it was just a delightful romance. For T, I'm going to recommend a Touch Her and Die romance, and for that I'm going to recommend Dragon Actually by G.A. Aiken. This is an older fantasy romance series about dragon shifters who are finding their mates. This has really great world building in it, and it has a male main character who, even though his love interest is a badass queen, she eventually becomes queen, a badass, who can take care of herself, he is still very much like, you touch my woman and I'm going to kill you. And I loved it. For the letter U, this one took me a minute to figure out a trope for this, but I'm going to recommend to you an underworld romance, okay? This kind of has vibes of the underworld, okay? Sort of Hades and Persephone-esque, but not quite a retelling or a reimagining, but just go with it, okay? It's A Dark and Secret Magic by Wallace Kinney. If you love Halloween, you need to read this book, okay? This has such immaculate fall vibes. It is about a witch and her love interest, who is another witch who comes back and seeks sanctuary with her, but he practices in the dark arts. And it leads to sort of that Hades and Persephone underworld romance. For the letter V, I am going to recommend to you a virgin romance, and I've talked about this book a lot, okay? A lot recently. So you're probably tired of me holding this book up. But Unicorn Bait by S.A. Hunter. In this, it is a fantasy romance that is very lighthearted, not a lot of world building, great relationship dynamics, but the male main character, who is this badass warlord, he's a virgin. And his new wife needs to sacrifice him to a unicorn in order to go back to her human realm. Loved it, okay? More people need to read this book, honestly. For W, I'm going to recommend to you a workplace romance, and this is another one that I absolutely love. I reread it a couple times. It made my best books of the decade list, and that is Tempt the Boss by Natasha Madison. So, very short book, but he needs a new secretary. She is a single mom who is entering the workforce, and she ends up being hired, and they do not like each other. They play some very dangerous pranks on one another, but they just can't help but, you know, fall in love with one another. This book made me laugh every single time I've ever read it, and it is just one of my favorite workplace romances. For the letter X, okay, I'm stretching it here because I could not think of a single trope that started with the letter X, so I'm going to recommend to you an extraterrestrial romance. Okay, basically an alien romance, but it's extraterrestrial. I'm going to recommend to you The Alien's Little Sister by Amanda Milo. This is one of my favorite alien romances because it features a female alien and a male human romance. They have such great chemistry. It is so freaking sweet, and I love this dynamic, and I want more of it. So if you like alien romances and you want something a little bit different, you should check this out. For the letter Y, I'm going to recommend to you a You're Mine romance, and there are a ton of these out there, let me tell you. A lot of books have the You're Mine trope in it, but I am going to recommend to you The Prince of Prohibition by Marilyn Marks. This is more of a historical paranormal. It is set in New York City in the 1920s. It is about fae who run the gangs of New York and a young woman who ends up being a tenant to the head of the pretty much fae mafia. I thought this was a really unique twist on the fae-human dynamics. It does lead into some fantastical elements at some point, but for most of the story, it's pretty paranormal. It is set in New York, but a really interesting shift. And for the letter Z, I am going to recommend to you a zombie romance, and that's going to be a throwback to Warm Bodies by Don't Ask Me the Author. I haven't read this book in a long time, but you cannot tell me that this is not a zombie romance, okay? This is about a woman who lives in this dystopian world where zombies have taken over, and she ends up kind of falling in love with one of the dopey zombie boys and trying to figure out how to cure him. It's the only thing I could think of for the letter Z. So those were my ABCs of romance trope book recommendations. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books or if you want to add any to your TBR. Be sure to check out all of the other collaborators on this project. They will once again be tagged down below, as well as that playlist, and I can't wait to see their interpretations of ABCs of Romance. But if you don't want to let me know if any of these made your TBR list and would like to let me know that you made it to the end of this video, could you just leave me, leave me a B for Becky, I guess. And with that, thank you for watching, and thank you to all of my fellow booktubers who participated in this video collab. I appreciate you guys so much for always wanting to indulge in my collaborative efforts. Until my next video, go out there and read some books A to Z. Bye!